Hello indie game fans, it's no secret that I love pixel art games, but there are levels to this game, with my top 25 picks being presented here. We begin with Celeste, a standout entry from 2018 which on the surface doesn't really seem to fit in this category, but I do like the minimalistic character designs and the environmental objects like buildings and plants. A very challenging platformer about literally and metaphorically climbing a mountain to overcome hardship, this really shines in the later areas with gorgeous skyscapes and backgrounds using yellow, orange, purple and green to great effect. Such a heartwarming story as well and highly recommended.
When you think of family, what comes to mind first? A story of hope, of love, of despair.
I've touched upon the family-based action roguelite Children of Morta on and off this year, since they have continued to put out more content and characters, both free and paid, in the months since launch in September 2019. I really enjoyed the various upgrade systems and the variety of playable characters, which created quite a compelling gameplay loop. While the pixel art does not pop as much, it is tremendously filled with details and beautiful in its own right. Kingdom New Lands featured in my previous video on the subject, but we are now looking at the sequel, Kingdom Two Crowns. Both are side-scrolling base building management strategy games which are really pretty, and I like the designs of the mounts and fantastical creatures in this. Add to that some interesting management systems and side-scrolling defense action, and you got yourself a winner. A very interesting entry is Dead Cells, which is technically pixel art but appears to have some sort of 3D rotational elements incorporated into the animations, which gives it a very unique look. This roguelike platformer probably doesn't need further introduction given its popularity, but I just love how good this feels to play. Loads of free content and DLC have been added since launch, and it is as close of a live game as we can get in the indie game space. I'm still amazed at how CrossCode came to be, spending nearly 7 years in early access, which resulted in a massive 16-bit SNES-style action-adventure RPG. This looks absolutely on point, capturing the look of games from the 16-bit era, and is to be commended for that, but even more than that, it includes modern tweaks and enhancements as well. Play as a stereotypical amnesiac protagonist, and this is set in an MMO, so there's some blurring of the lines of reality. Your character is supposed to be the weakest class in the game, a Sparrowmancer, but of course, you will find and unlock the power in that. Since its launch, this has been successfully ported to consoles, and they are still working on post-game DLC, which should launch sometime next year.
Commencing operations. It's a trap.
I was very impressed with the Smash TV-like Xeno Crisis, since this will look right at home on the Genesis, and in a weird twist of fate, this developer did actually have a Kickstarter campaign and made physical cartridges that would still work on the old hardware. There's something beautiful and comforting about the retro style of pixel art, but it is an all-action title which is simply fun.
Make your selection. Danger.
One gorgeous pixel art title that should not be missed is the 2D Souls-like title Death's Gambit, featuring massive bosses, gorgeous character portraits, backgrounds and animation. The hauntingly beautiful gothic world is worth experiencing, and while there were complaints around launch, things seem to have been patched up and fixed since then. I last spoke to this developer in August this year, who confirmed that they are working on the relaunch of a game, including 7 to 8 additional areas, so it's a whole expansion that would make it one of the largest Metroidvanias of all time. So I'm certainly very keen and waiting to see more. But until then, stay tuned and I'll let you know when it's out. A pleasant smaller action roguelite from last year is Sparklite, where you play as a plucky mechanic and have to take out the Baron and his forces who are draining the earth of its energy known as Sparklite. I like the enemy visual designs in this, with plenty of permanent roguelike progression systems to keep you going. One of the more recent entries on this list is the puzzle platformer INMOST, releasing on Steam a couple of months ago, and impressed with the amount of detail. While the levels and landscapes primarily use a single colour at a time, the use of lighting and shading is very impressive indeed. There are 3 characters, each having their own unique gimmick, so variety in the gameplay as well. If you have not played it, I highly recommend you to check this out, so please do and let me know what you think. I was very excited for Wargroove in 2019 since it was my most anticipated game of that year, promising to bring back the Advanced Wars style of tactics game and delivering that to the highest degree. I love the designs of the units, especially the chibi versions on the overworld with 4 distinct factions. An epic story campaign, a map editor, and even online cross-platform multiplayer support makes it still worth going back to, and they did put out the free Double Trouble DLC with even more content, so do give this a shot if you love tactics games. I like the design of Touhou Lunar Nights, which has an art style that I can best describe as Japanese pixel art. It looks significantly different from the art used in Western games, with less pronounced outlines but a tremendous amount of detail as well. Being part of the Touhou franchise, the Bullet Hell roots translates rather nicely into a pixel art Metroidvania with impressive screen-filling attacks. This is also one of my top Metroidvania games of all time, so it comes highly recommended. You will soon be seeing a lot more of ScourgeBringer on the channel, which makes it to 1.0 next week. This roguelike platformer has been described as Dead Cells meets Celeste, and in a similar fashion, just feels awesome to control. Play as the best warrior of a tribe, delving into ancient ruins to seek knowledge of the past and perhaps the redemption of humanity. more beautifully animated enemies, this is not to be missed. I had the original Jamestown in my previous video on the topic, but since then, the enhanced, re-released Jamestown Plus was put out, but remains just as gorgeous. This is a co-op shoot 'em up with some of the best looking enemies and background elements, coupled together with fun weapons, which makes this a treat. The roguelite Indiana Jones-like tactics game, Pathway, got a really mixed reception at launch, but the developers have listened to the community feedback and rebalanced and retweaked the game, and based on recent reviews, have improved it tremendously. The overworld map, characters, units, and even inventory items are superbly done, and think of this as XCOM crossed with FTL but in the 1930s, and you get the idea. The grind has been reduced and the permanent progression systems made more compelling, so I can recommend this for tactics fans. I'm a fan of the action platformer The Messenger, once again nailing that retro look, but interestingly, allowing you to switch between 8 and 16-bit. This is a time and dimension warping adventure that really goes places, with some excellent writing and swerves that you might not see coming. Play as the messenger, who has to deliver a scroll that is vital to the survival of his clan, where, of course, the 8-bit look does look very much like retro Ninja Gaiden games. I have to applaud the developers of The Eternal Castle Remastered for their bold artistic choice, since this is a fake remaster of a game that was supposed to be released in 1987, but there never was such a game. However, the 2-bit CGA look makes it stand out in a modern context, and while it may not be to everyone's liking, it is even more old school than other retro games, and I have to give it a nod. This is a cinematic platformer with an increased focus on combat and guns, and even has fantastical elements on this alien planet. But I'm just really glad that there are no limits to the inventiveness of indie developers. You cannot talk about pixel art games without mentioning Shovel Knight Treasure Trove, since this is a bona fide legend in indie gaming right now. The original game, later given the subtitle Shovel of Hope, was a Kickstarter success and nailed the 8-bit look, very reminiscent of Mega Man, of which this draws inspiration from. The free campaigns, Plague of Shadows, Spectre of Torment, King of Cards, and Showdown are packaged in, with even more spin-offs and guest appearances in other games. The Boundary Break video on this actually goes in depth into how the game is put together, which is more complex than it seems, but it is very interesting and worth a watch. Hyper Light Drifter is without a doubt one of the standout action-adventure titles, set in a ruined world filled with technology, wordlessly conveying its story to you. I like the bold use of colours, drawing from quite the variety, and is not your typical grim-dark post-apocalyptic fare, but add to that fantastic action and you have yourself a winner. A title from this year that impressed me is World of Horror, a 1-bit roguelite RPG with a horror theme, where you play as a curious teen investigating various supernatural incidents in your town. The disturbing designs of the enemies is really horrific, reminiscent of famed horror manga artist Junji Ito's work, and this game is an example of how pixel art can be used effectively in horror as well. There's supposed to be a Halloween update coming very soon, so as good a time as any to buy this game. I like the gorgeous colours used in Iconoclasts, a Metroidvania with a story to tell. In a world where a religious authority controls the government, and where it is illegal to be an unlicensed mechanic, you play as that very character who uses a wrench to help others at the cost of being pursued by the government. I'm still in awe of the art and animation in this, with fantastic characters, detailed environments, great boss fights, and a compelling narrative, and it is even more impressive when you find out that this is from a solo developer. It was perhaps too many years in the making, but has done well, and I would recommend you to give this a shot if you have not. Any list talking about pixel art games would be incomplete without featuring Owl Boy, the gorgeous high-bit pixel art action game where you play as the titular character and have an adventure in the skies. Developer D-Pad Studio did put out a blog post talking about high-bit pixel art games, which are games that use pixel art but with more modern tweaks, so lighting, shadows, animations, and even resolution, but that's all technical stuff. This game looks so good, especially from the skylines and the clouds, with an interesting shoot-'em-up-like system to play around with as well. One more Genesis-style action platformer makes the list with Blazing Chrome, coming to us from Brazilian developer Joy Masher, who are just fantastic at making retro pixel art games. This is a run-and-gun title that is very similar to Contra Rogue Core, down to the 2-player support, run-and-gun action, and even weapon upgrades and power-ups. It also has that old-school level of difficulty, so it will take you a number of retries to complete, but I certainly had fun with this. A very pretty game from last year is Katana Zero, a great looking and feeling action platformer where you play as a samurai assassin who goes to therapy. On top of slick action and bullet time, making you feel nigh invincible, it touches upon themes of mental health and trauma as you recount what happened during your missions. It has an interesting storytelling aspect that is atypical for such a game, but with some beautiful lighting and interesting blend of the classic and modern, this gets a good spot on the list. A game which I literally just covered, the roguelite RPG where you play as rebels fighting against a galactic empire, Star Renegades simply looks awesome, with some of the best pixel art that I have seen in years. This developer did share some interesting information on Twitter, with some of the bosses and enemies having 600 plus frames of animation, all painstakingly hand-drawn, which, coupled together with a rock-paper-scissors style combat system, some interesting timeline manipulation stuff, a nemesis system, and even more reasons to play after you beat it for the first time, this is the complete package and is a game that I love. Coming in at the coveted number 1 spot is the action platformer Blasphemous, a side-scrolling adventure which is gorgeously animated, presenting quite the challenge with its share of disturbing imagery. This borrows from the Catholic faith in the Spanish Inquisition, showing just how messed up acts committed in the name of religion can be, crossing this with the atmosphere of something like Dark Souls into quite the gruesome experience. Enemy designs are one of the key highlights, with people nailed to crucifixes, giant floating heads, and even horrifying babies. The developer put out the Stir of Dawn free DLC recently, which added Spanish voice acting if you want to truly be immersed in this world, but unparalleled pixel art gives it the number 1 spot. To see more of the big picture, check out these awesome videos, and I will see you after the jump.